Good morning, everyone. On behalf of the ISO, we'd like to welcome you to today's Day-Ahead Market Enhancements Configurable Parameters Implementation Working Group meeting. My name is Christina Guimera, representing ISO Stakeholder Affairs. Just a few reminders before we get started today. Today's call is being recorded for informational and convenience purposes only, and any related transcription should not be reprinted without the ISO's permission. Please remember to keep your comments respectful and professional today, and we welcome and look forward to your engagement and participation today. As you may have noticed, there are some new features on the WebEx this afternoon. The raise hand icon is now directly at the bottom of your WebEx screen, and if you joined audio only, please press *3 on your device to join the queue. And there's also a new Inteller Transparency Viewer at the bottom right, so please be sure to refresh it prior to viewing. And closed captioning is also now available at the bottom left of your screen by clicking the CC button. And please remember to state your name and affiliation first before making comments today. And you can also send your comments and questions in via chat, either to all panelists or directly to myself. And if you need technical assistance during the meeting today, please send a chat to the event producer, Inteller Events. And just a reminder, we're going to go through all the agenda items and then pause for questions at the end. So with that, I'll introduce Isabella Mahane, an account manager with the stakeholder engagement team at the ISO.
All right, thanks, Christina, and good morning, everyone. Thanks for joining us today for session 3 of the DAME Configurable Parameters Implementation Working Group. Like Christina said, my name is Isabella Mahane. I'm an account manager here at the ISO and also facilitator for the Implementation Working Group. So the agenda for today's session will start off with just a background and some meeting objectives for today's session. And then I'll turn things over to Guillermo Bautista-Alderte to go over the timeline and overview for the working group. It's been a little while since we met on this item, so just would like to refresh everyone's memory. And then after we go through the timeline and overview, we'll pause for questions and open discussion before covering next steps. So if we can go to the next slide. All right, so the objective for today's working group, today's session will really serve as a kickoff session for the working group effort on these configurable parameters. And we'd just like to reiterate the plan and timeline for the effort. We had previously covered it last summer when we met initially to kick this off, but since it's been a little while, we're just going to go over it again and refresh everyone's memory. So if we go to the next slide. So in 2024, we did hold 2 working group sessions on this configurable parameter effort. The first one was August 7th, and we accepted comments in response to that first session. During that first session, we did provide a suggested timeline for the working groups, but received some feedback from stakeholders that they'd like to see more working groups earlier on in the process. So we've adjusted the timeline to reflect that, which Guillermo will cover later on. And then the revised timeline and overall plan for the working group was discussed in a subsequent working group in December of last year. So we'll be sharing more details around that timeline. So it looks like we have one hand from Michelle Keto. Michelle, we can take your question and then I'll hand things over to Guillermo.
Through all of the slides, and I want to just raise this concern at the beginning. You know, I have been looking at map stage at the IRU imbalance reserve requirements, and I've been told that those are not realistic. But I just feel like if we're going to be doing testing, and I've been told that we're not going to actually have real values until parallel operations, which from my view is way too late to be doing testing. We have to be testing with something realistic. In addition, I was directed to the, I guess the February meeting. And when I look at the February meeting, it looks like imbalance reserves for CAISO are maybe 4% of demand, but that is like 1,800 megawatts. But it's then going to be distributed throughout the day. And I really just want to emphasize that you can't procure something if you don't know what the requirement is. And likewise, our testing is not going to be realistic unless we have a realistic sense of what we're trying to procure. Because, if you're going to be trying to decide where to put these requirements and whether you're going to enforce transmission constraints, you have to have a realistic sense of what we're trying to procure. So I just feel like we're sort of missing, the founding, the building blocks for doing realistic testing. And I just feel like, we've been ignoring it. I really am not understanding why you guys can't provide realistic imbalance reserve requirements, both for testing and also, a distribution over 24 hours on average is just not good enough. Like, we need to know by hour what the requirement is. You can't procure when you have no idea what you're procuring. So I just want to stress that. And I really think that getting, good data on the IRU requirement in parallel operations in February is too late.
Okay. Thank you for that feedback, Michelle. And I'll defer to Guillermo or Oswin if there are additional comments or responses there.
But this is a working group, so will I get a response?
Yes, the working group is meant to be collaborative with open discussion.
So could I get a response?
Yeah,
You
Guillermo.
will get it, Michelle. Yeah, thank you, Michelle, for the feedback. And you will get it, but we have to go through the material, otherwise there is no working group here either. So we have a scheduled material. There will be a time, the right time to have address your comments and your questions. So please hold on when we reach that point.
All right, I'll pass it to you, Guillermo.
Okay, thank you, Isabella, for the introduction and for providing some background on this. That actually is very relevant to the question Michelle was raising before. And let me unpack a little bit more on this item, because history is important to put the right context in the discussion. When we initiated this effort effectively a year ago, back in August, we started to develop the plan, and the original timeline was built around the overall milestones of the EDAM implementation. The configurable parameters is one of the building blocks for the overall implementation of the DIM and EDAM, and is to some extent dependent on what we can have available to be able to perform such an analysis of the configurable parameters. For some of you that may have participated since the beginning, you may recall that the CAISO proposal was to start the analysis of the parameters towards the end of 2025, because yes, we have the concern that the quality of the market application, the quality of the inputs was not great at the beginning of market simulation. And the very strong feedback that we got was that even though we recognize those limitations, there was still value to assess and analyze how these parameters were interplaying and how the market application was performing around this configuration. And that's the reason precisely we actually modified the timeline to have more opportunities in the process to assess the interplays of these configurable parameters. And yes, it comes with a trade-off that the earlier you're in the process, the less defined the things are, because everything is being built as we go along. And that includes the data quality, the robustness of the application, and that is just the nature of the business when we are going into a meaningful change of the market application. There are trade-offs to be made between two factors. One, how early you can go into analyzing the functionality, and the quality that comes the earlier you are going into the process. The compromise, as defining this second round of the working group that took place in December, was to start early in the process, with a caveat that we understand the limitations of the market quality and the data availability that could be at that point in time. Next slide, please. Now, to put the scope of what we are dealing with here, this is a dedicated effort to assess the functionality and the interplays, the impacts on the market outcomes of very specific and targeted configurable parameters. There are 5 specific parameters that we're going to be assessing in this working group effort. One of those is the set of constraints, transmission constraints that are going to be enforced for the market application. That could go along the way of flow gates, nomograms, and contingencies. These are the three types of transmission constraints that we enforce in the market. The second parameter that we're going to be assessing is the proportion, what value, what percentage of the imbalance reserves are going to be considered for the deliverability. Under the nodal approach of the imbalance reserve, we not only ensure that the capacity is procured, but also that that capacity procured in the different places where it's being procured can actually be feasible to flow on the transmission system. That is what we use through the deployment scenarios. This parameter effectively tells us out of the total requirements and the total procurement that we have for imbalance reserve, how much we're going to assess for deliverability, the portion that should be feasible to flow on the transmission constraint. Then we have two other parameters that are pegged one to the other, and they are set to the $55. One parameter is effectively the bid cap that is used in the demand curve for imbalance reserve. We have the requirements, we build a demand curve, and the upper value at which we clear the full requirement would be at the $55. And from there, we start bringing down the demand curve segment based on the economics of the market. This demand curve is going to be used to determine what is the optimal value that is going to be clearing for imbalance reserves. The other $55 associated with this parameter is about the default bid. Similar to energy, where we do market power mitigation, there could be this reference of the default bid that unless we gain some operational experience, we really don't have a very good idea what it should be. So we're going to start with this $55. Now, these two parameters, it's important to highlight that they are already prescribed in the tariff of the dam. So if we were to reach the level of assessment and confidence that yes, there needs a need to change that value, it wouldn't part of just this straightforward working group outcome. It would have to go through a dedicated initiative policy effort to be able to change. The expectation is that even as we go closer to production with parallel operations, there may be not enough elements to really make a conclusion if this $55 parameter should be changed or not. So the expectation is that we're going to assess the interplays, the functionality of the market with these parameters, and then we really are going to go live with those $55. And we will continue to assess as we go live how the functionality of the market is with these two parameters. And if there is a need, then we can initiate a formal process to adjust these $55 values. The last parameter that is in the scope of this effort is about the factors, the constants that we're going to be using associated with the envelope constraints. This is effectively for storage resources. And all these parameters are in the scope of the working group. And I will elaborate more down the road in the presentation how we're going to be targeting the assessment for these different parameters. Next slide, please. In order to put the context of this effort, it is important to differentiate what we're trying to achieve here. This is not market simulation. This is not parallel operations. We are not trying to replicate what the actual production is going to look like. This is an assessment to effectively determine how appropriate the performance of the market is given the setup of these different parameters. Whether it's the transmission constraints, the envelope constraints, the $55, it's about the interplay, how they influence, how they determine the outcome of the market. And the means that we have at this point is effectively simulated scenarios. We don't have realistic conditions to try to mimic to the precision that we wish all the interplays that naturally are bounded to happen in actual operation of the system. And when we go and start doing the simulation, it's going to be quite a wide range of areas that we're going to be analyzing. Effectively, once we start analyzing the performance of these parameters, it has to go across the board in terms of the market functionality. We're going to be looking into the schedules for not only imbalance reserves, but also for energy, for the ancillary services, for the reliability capacity up, down. We're going to be looking to the price formation, how the different components interplay, how the co-optimization is looking into the energy and trade-offs with imbalance reserves and RCU, RCD. And we're going to be looking specifically also closely to the new product that we're introducing, that is the procurement of imbalance reserves, how they are procured, in what areas, in the diversity between the footprint of the market, and at what price are they economically clearing, how frequently they are procured less than the full requirements. And there are a lot of interplays that this has to have with congestion, because at the end, when we procure imbalance reserves, we are doing this at the locational nodal level. And therefore, congestion and the transfers is a key component to the analysis that we have to perform for this interplay with the different parameters. And we also have the new functionality of imbalance reserves, market power mitigation. We want to assess how they are performing, and everything is predicated on the inputs, right? And we have as the core goal to really assess how these parameters are influencing the market outcomes of these new features that we have. The CAISO has committed, and we have on the scope to continue to assess these 5 parameters, including the 2 parameters that are already defined in the tariff at $55. Now, given where we are in the process of the overall implementation, we are just starting next week what is the formal market simulation. We have to realize that this is not just a matter of assessing one condition, one scenario to draw conclusions, right? The way we typically approach this level of uncertainty is by effectively performing what we call sensitivity scenarios. It's not just a matter of taking one single snapshot and draw all the conclusions based on that single scenario. Rather, we take permutations, sensitivity changes of, well, if we procure imbalance reserves from one range from one day to the other, we really want to assess how the market functions when we are imposing all these discrete different levels of requirements. The cornerstone of this working group effort and the analysis that we're going to be performing relies heavily on this approach of having sensitivity scenarios. It's not just one single snapshot, it's a set of scenarios based on these perturbations we're going to do for different parameters. We may be assessing the imbalance requirement for different ranges. We may be assessing the different parameters across a whole range of the values rather than one specific value on time. And this is where the value of the analysis that we can have for the first stage of this process is going to come. Give us the idea of how the inputs are associated to the outputs once we control the logic by modifying the range of the values. Next slide, please. Now, this is potentially the critical piece that we discussed last time. And as Isabella indicated, the main motivation for this specific session that is still called a working group is a refresher, it's a kickoff to bring everybody up to speed where we landed in the last 2 rounds. And there is no really technical material here that we're discussing in terms of the specific analysis that we are performing. Is to set up the stage of how we're going to be approaching, what the timeline is going to be, and be a refresher for everybody. This is what we are expecting to perform in the upcoming sessions. The timeline that is shown here goes from the very beginning, where we initiated the discussion back in August 2024, all the way to pre-go live, that is going to be in the range of March 2026. There are different markers in blue. The one where we are right now is the August 26th. is a refresher session to set up everybody to the same pace and understanding what the effort is about. And then the actual working group effort is going to start as early as October 2025. And then from there, we're going to hold these monthly sessions, one in November, one in December. We keep going past market simulation and we get into parallel operations. We're going to hold these 3 other working group sessions. And we organize that to take advantage of the available functionality and available data and the quality that may exist from one stage to another. The light blue, the bright blue that goes all the way through the end of 2025 relies heavily on the market simulation setup. The darker blue stage relies heavily on what parallel operations is going to be. And the idea is that as we start in October 2025, now we're going to start bringing analysis for a specific scenario, for a specific parameter, and this is where we're going to have the collaborative working group session with all participants. And we will go one by one as we progress through the 3 sessions in October through December. We expect to be able to cover all 5 scenarios, all 5 parameters. And the idea is that by the end of the market simulation effort, we are going to have a recommendation of what parameter values should be used for parallel operations. And then effectively we repeat the cycle. We start with some specific values of the parameters in parallel operations with more realistic data coming into the systems, everything being integrated, participants be able to bid in and having more realistic, closer to actual production information. We're going to have a second opportunity to further assess the functionality and the interface of these parameters. One of the questions we got through the previous 2 sessions was what footprint we're going to be using for this analysis. The footprint that we're going to be using is the same one that is going to be used for market simulation and parallel operations. And that is composed of both CAISO and PAC balancing areas, because that is the system that is being ramped up and built up to go live. There will be no PAC balancing area to begin with in this round. It's too early in the process. Everything is going to be limited to only PAC and CAISO areas. And correspondingly, the assessment that we're going to perform for these parameters is going to be bounded and limited to use the information that is available for both CAISO and PAC balancing areas. The expectation is that once we complete the assessment of these parameters through parallel operations, then we're going to have a final recommendation of what the parameters should be in place. Now, there is some more information that is in subsequent slides, but keep in mind, 3 of the parameters, that is the set of enforced constraints, the envelope constraint parameters, and the deployable percentage, they are going to be defined in the business practice manuals. They don't have to go through a tariff process. They are not defining the tariff. It's going to be managed through a BPM. The $55, again, as I indicated, that is already prescribed in the tariff. We will assess still the performance of these parameters, but the expectation is that we're going to go live with this 55 unless something really dramatically concerning shows through market simulation and parallel operations. Next slide, please. Okay, now I elaborated already on the framework that we have for this working group. And as I indicated, there are 2 stages. The one that is going to be relying on information from market simulation and the one that follows relying on information from parallel operations. The main approach or the main goal for this effort is to really analyze the parameters with the functionality that is available, with the data that is available. And yes, we are going to be working in parallel to market simulation and to parallel operations. Something I really want to highlight is that even though the working group effort of the configurable parameter is going to be happening in parallel, concurrent to market simulations and parallel operations, they are independent. There is no strong dependency from one way or the other. Yes, we are going to be using some scenarios created in market simulation in parallel operations as the starting point of the simulated cases we are going to use to analyze the configurable parameters. We are not just going to take it as given and run the analysis for the parameters. We are going to tune it, adjust it as much as makes sense to have the cleanest possible setup and starting point for this analysis of the parameters. The only dependency that may exist between parallel operations and this working group of the configurable parameters is that at the end of the market simulation, based on all the analysis that we have performed between October and December, that is going to guide us into potential adjustments that we have to do to the original parameter values to use in parallel operations. That may be the only dependency of what goes into the parallel operations. Next slide, please. And this sketch is trying to illustrate that interplay along the three phases. The first phase, starting as early as next week, the formal market simulation starts on September 2nd, is going to start generating these cases of the day-ahead market. We are going to start using some of those scenarios and adjust those as needed for the purpose of the analysis of the parameters. And we're going to be iterating using those safe cases as a starting point. We're going to be doing all the sensitivity analysis. At the end of this effort, we are going to have enough information to guide the definition of what values of these parameters should be used for parallel operations. The outcome may be we just stay with the same ones, and there is no dramatically different outcomes from the simulation, or very well, we can assess that some parameters have to be adjusted based on the findings that we have from the analysis in the first stage. When we go into the parallel operation stage that goes from in the first part of 2026, we are going to continue. Basically, we are going to redo the analysis of the parameters now with better quality, with more robust market application functionality to assess if there are further changes to the definition of the value that we came with from the market simulation for parallel operations. The expectation is that at the end of parallel operations time frame, when we continue and finalize the analysis of the parameters using information of parallel operations, we are going to be at the place where we can make a determination what the final values should be used for these 5 parameters to be used for the go live of the done. These are the values that are going to be incorporated into the business practice manuals to have a reference that these are the values we are going to be using in production. And it doesn't end there, because once we go live, we will continue to do this assessment of the parameters to inform what changes we may need to perform now using actual production information. It's going to be very useful to accrue some meaningful data set of actual operation of the market to have the best information and the best reference of information to assess the functionality of these parameters. So even after we go live, we expect that we are going to continue the assessment of these parameters. There are some links that we have included in the lower part of the deck for your information that has to do with the market simulation plan. I really want to emphasize the point I have made earlier about how we're going to be using market simulation information. We're going to use some of the cases, not every single case of the market simulation. We're going to try to clean up, tune, make the more robust cases that we can, reflecting as much as possible more realistic conditions. And then we're going to use these cases to perform all the sensitivity scenarios changing the ranges of the parameters from one bookend to another to really unpack the implications of the values of those parameters impacting the market solution. Next slide, please. And along this line, and now maybe coming back to answer Michelle's questions, what are we trying to perform here? First of all, I want to make sure that people realize that we are talking about a dedicated, targeted effort for the configurable parameters. This is not about a replication of actual results of market simulation. Market simulation purpose is to ensure that the functionality is working as intended and provide an opportunity to participants to test that functionality. It's not to replicate and project the future actual production conditions. Yes, the better quality we may have, the better solutions we may have, but it's too early to try to use this market simulation setup to draw conclusions on how actually production is going to behave or to look like. The CAISO is committed to perform this analysis with the best information we have. And again, based on the first two sessions that we have back in August and December, we understand that there is a trade-off. The earlier you go into this approach of assessing the functionality and the parameters, well, the more you have to deal with the lower quality of the data because we are just integrating all the systems, the data quality is not guaranteed. And that is a reality that we have to understand when we are dealing with these stages early in the implementation of the EDAM. The idea is that the conclusions of this working group along the line of the assessment of the parameters is going to depend on the quality of the data. And we have been very open and transparent to that, and we have to recognize that even as we go into the parallel operation when we have potentially the best quality of the data prior to go live, there may be some considerations that we have to be conservative because one of the things that neither market simulation or parallel operations is going to able to replicate is the full behavioral changes that are going to happen. We have new market products, we have participants that we have to define how they are going to be bidding, at what prices they are going to be doing, and we cannot just assume or create conditions to believe that are going to be reflective of all these behavioral conditions that are going to happen once we are live. Next slide, please. I think I already touched on this $55. As I indicated, these are within the scope of the assessment. The difference for these $55 parameters is that they are already defined in the tariff, so it's a higher standard to even try to change those prior to go live. The most likely scenario is that we are going to go live with this 55, and unless something very dramatically shows up in the market simulation and parallel operations, we might have to do a dedicated initiative to adjust these values. The likely scenario is that we go live with this 55, and after the fact, with real data, we assess potential changes to this $55. Next slide, please. In terms of the logistics, I have elaborated on that. I believe one of the key questions was what area is going to be considered in the simulation and in the working group effort that is going to be limited to PAC and CAISO areas, how the information is going to be flowing. This is different to market simulations and to parallel operations where participants can go and see the application. For this effort of the working groups, we are expecting to put together analysis as we go through all the sensitivity scenarios that we have in mind. We're going to be writing up all the analysis that we have, and we will be sharing those before the call, and then we have just open discussions about this analysis and findings through each of the working groups. So we will provide that analytics consolidated for consumption in the working groups. About the values that we're going to be using in the different stages, I think we already signaled what are the values that we're going to start with in market simulation. The output of the first range of the market simulation that we're going to perform for the parameters during this range of October to December are going to be used to determine potential changes to the parameters that are going to be used for parallel operations. So prior to going to parallel operations, through this working group, we are going to inform the community what values are going to be used for parallel operations. And then eventually, when we finalized the working group in the period of parallel operations, at the end, we're going to make the final determination as part of this working group of what the values of these parameters would be, and these are going to be memorialized in the business practice manual. Again, the $55 is already defined in the tariff. Next slide, please. Okay, before we reach this point, so let me now go back to try to answer some of Michelle's questions, and I see other hands also up. So coming back to Michelle's questions, first of all, I would really like to emphasize the difference between market simulations and configurable parameters. They are running in parallel. They are going to be concurrent. We are not just going to take as given a simple scenario of the market simulation and use it for all the analysis of the configurable parameters. We are going to be doing as much as possible reconciliation and calibration for values that make sense. And from there, we're going to start doing all this sensitivity analysis. Yes, I hear Michelle concerned about the quality of the data in market simulation. Yes, we understand that at this early stage of the implementation, there is so much we can do as we are integrating the different applications and systems to guarantee that the best quality of information is going to be there. I think Michelle pointed out specifically the area of concern regarding the quality of the imbalance reserve requirements. There was an effort, Michelle, as you know, and we have expressed to you, targetedly to focus on the imbalance reserve requirements. The logic is there, the assessment, the analysis is there of how the logic is going to be implemented. Now, the point of the quality of the values generated for market simulation, well, it's not about the functionality, it's more about the underlying input data, right? And in order to generate those requirements, we need to have the corresponding input data for load, wind, solar, for the footprint of the market, for the period of time that we are going to be using to generate the information. So everything boils down to the quality of the data. The logic is there to generate the requirements every day, but it's depending on the quality of the data. And at this stage of market simulation, the CAISO is committed to do as much as possible to reconcile and bring the best quality, but there are inherent limitations. If there are more concerns specific for market simulation, I would really encourage to leverage on the discussions of the dedicated market simulation efforts. There may be some implications for the case that we may use for the configurable parameters, but I want to caveat that they don't belong together in the same place. So we are being very targeted to the setup that we are having for the configurable parameters, and we will try to reconcile as much as we can. If there are more concerns for the specific scenarios that are going to be used for market simulation, I think you need to bring that to the forum of market simulation and see what else we can do. Let me pause there and before I keep going, and maybe we can start with Michelle, the operator.
Yeah, Michelle, do you have any follow-up questions? Could we please unmute Michelle?
Thanks. Sorry, I tried to unmute, but I was muted on your end. Okay, so I'd like to go back to this. I feel like I go to the market sim, they say come here. I come here and you say to go to market sim. So my issue is when I look at the map stage for 818 and I calculate the imbalance reserves across the day, and compare it to load, it's 12% of load. It's very high. In addition, the uncertainty is high when wind and solar are down. So it's like 3,600 in hour ending 22. It's very, in some hours it's 5,000, 6,000 megawatts, which is very inconsistent with what I saw in the information you presented in January and February. My concern is that testing something that's not real is not going to help us at all. And the very basis of what we're doing, the building block, is the imbalance reserve requirement. So if you want to see how it interacts with energy, if you want to see whether you want to deploy it to different locations, you have to know how much you're deploying. And I just feel like, you know, it's kind of a waste of our time to be going through this effort with bad data. And I was trying to get you guys to tell us what it's going to look like, and I'm not understanding how you can't develop. I mean, you know the methodology, you know the load, you know the wind, you know the solar uncertainty. I don't understand how you can't have good data now for that. And also, if you want people to prepare and have the resources and the bids for the imbalance reserve requirement, we have to know how big it is. And what you guys told us in February and January was it's like 4% of load. But when I look at map stage, it's 12% of load. So that's like just a huge difference. And I'm not really sure what I'm missing, but I keep on getting pushed to someplace else. And then I would just note the MSC said that this was so important. They said, there are many elements of DAME for which there is no precedent of successful operation experience from the ISO to learn. The CAISO will need to adapt the design over time based on the results of testing of the full software model when it is developed. And then they say the adaptation will need to move at a more rapid pace than the glacial speed of typical stakeholder processes if it is to enable the CAISO and the WEC to meet reliability needs of its evolving resource mix and public policy goals. At the same time, the CAISO should not be given permission to make willy-nilly day-to-day changes in parameters or constraints. There needs to be a process for identifying issues and discussing them with stakeholders, proposing, implementing changes, observing outcomes, and then commencing a new cycle if needed. And I fear that if we aren't using good data from the beginning, we aren't going to be able to define these parameters appropriately for parallel operations. So I guess my question again is, when can we get good data on the imbalance reserve requirement, which I don't think is related to the software implementation?
It's not, Michelle. I have indicated that it boils down to the quality underlying to the raw data that is the input, right? To have an imbalance reserve requirement calculated, you need all the inputs, and these inputs have to be with the quality expected. So if you don't have that quality in the inputs, obviously, no matter what the implementation of the requirement logic is, the requirements
Right,
are simply going to reflect the inputs.
What's
now,
the problem with the quality?
Let me finish.
Okay.
Let me finish. And I understand your case. The piece you are missing here, Michelle, is that for the configurable parameters, I have clearly indicated we are going to do the best we can do to reconcile and ensure that the quality of the scenarios are there. If you are seeing potentially too high of values for the imbalance reserves, well, that is something that we are going to look at even before we start doing the analysis, right? So that is the critical piece I want you to understand, that we are not just going to be relying on the simulation as it is. Part of our diligence is to set up the cleanest case we can for the purpose of the configurable parameters. For the purpose of market simulation, we really need to untangle this, because we are putting all this together and it doesn't really go together. The market simulation purpose is very specific to ensure that the functionality is working. You put an input and you see what the output should be. It is not to replicate to the quality of the production data that we have. Ideally, we should, but the limitation is there, and we have to be realistic that it's not just feasible at this stage of the implementation to have all the data quality to the point where we can go live. And I encourage you to work on the market simulation team. We have committed to have a follow-up with you, and we will have it in terms of what we can do to improve the quality for the market simulation. But it doesn't help that you put all together of market simulation and configurable parameters, because that's not the case.
So Guillermo, so I would like to say that I've been raising this for 2 months, and just recently I was told that the quality of the data would be good in parallel operations. When I raised this in Market Sim, they told me to come to configurable parameters, and now that I'm raising it in configurable parameters, you're telling me to go to Market Sim. So I think you could understand my frustration.
Well,
I just wanted to flag that we heard from Christy Sonata that she'll be reaching out to you to follow up and set up a meeting with you to further explain.
Right, but it's not just me. This is to try to make this useful for everyone, right? And I just can't seem to get an answer about how come we can't get good data, just one good set. Every day when I go look at map stage, and if that's what's going to be used, it looks like there are 5,000 megawatts of imbalance reserves required in the middle of the day, which in my mind is going to increase BCR, and that's something we should be concerned about. So anyway, I do have a lot of concerns, and I'm a little frustrated because I keep on getting shunted to different places, but I think I've raised my point. Thanks.
Thank you, Michelle.
Next in the queue, we have Chunyu Luo. Go ahead.
Hello. I didn't hear my name. Can you hear me okay?
Yes, we can hear you.
Yeah, this is Chunyu from PG&E. Yes, I do want to piggyback some of the points that Michelle raised. I will say that for Market Sim, yes, we first thing first, we do want to make sure the functionality work as expected. And two, we call the Market Sim, we want to simulate how it's going to turn out in production. I think that we always have the two goals in mind. And then I do want to ask, because we're still in the connectivity test period, I'm not sure this is the right place to ask. And when we go to Market Sim, we always understand the data might not be quality during the connectivity test, but when going into September 2nd and onward, so what CAISO will do differently in terms of the market, the data quality?
Yeah, thank you for your questions. I'm afraid this is not the right context of the discussion for this topic because, again, this is a configurable parameter. We are not talking here about the explicit effort of market simulation. And
Right.
I really want to emphasize this effort, how to differentiate the tracks. All what we are doing for the configurable parameters is to work in concurrent to market simulation. And we may be able to take some of the cases, the ones that we deem to be more valuable and more safer to use for the purpose of the analysis of configurable parameters. But any challenges about the quality of the data, the flow, the connectivity, and so on, that really belongs to the market simulation forum, please.
I think it's also related, heavily related. Otherwise, why will you have October and November and the subsequent working group if you're not dependent on some of the market sim information?
Oh, yeah.
Right. I'm just thinking these are the fundamental parameters, and that you're going to use it as to model. And what I'm asking is, when we go into, maybe I need to be more specific. When we go to September 2nd, are we going to use California and Pacific Coast historical data going into the market sim? That is a base, and I believe that this is not solely a market sim question.
Sorry, I'm afraid I couldn't follow the idea. Could you please repeat?
So when we go into the structured and unstructured market sim starting from September 2nd, we're CAISO using both California and Pacific Coast historical data as a base. Because you did mention that the data, it is going to be including the California and Pacific Core. So my question is, when we go into the first day, whether those historical data as the base data going forward?
Yeah. Well, let me try to unpack the question. When you say first day, what do you mean?
September 2nd and onward?
Yeah, again, that is market simulation, right? we are not here to discuss market simulation per se. There will be many scenarios that you can follow through the plan of market simulation. At some point, when we are deep enough in the market simulation, we are going to grab some of those cases. We are going to tailor those cases to be used for the effort of the configurable parameters. That's the only dependency.
The only depend. So okay, sorry, you repeat yourself. So my other question is, so if like it's not independent with the market sim, so what will we learn new coming into October and November working group? That's my question.
Yes. Independent of what you may learn from market simulation testing, what you are going to be learning in the working groups of October, November, and December is going to be how the market outputs are influenced by the setup of the different parameters that we're going to configure. If you have, just to say, the attenuation factors for storage resources, if we use 85 rather than 60 or 100, how these changes of the parameters are going to influence the market solution. That is the core effort of the configurable parameters, to make the association of, by moving this parameter this way, this is how it impacts the market solution.
So is it possible, so we'll say what you learned from the outcome of market sim, we'll say coming to October, and the initial set of the parameter setting, it's not near any of the outcome that CAISO expected. What will you do then?
We would propose adjusted values for the parameters to be used down the road, most likely for parallel operations. That is the whole intent of doing this first effort in market simulation, right? To see how the starting values are going to look like and how changing those values in a different range could influence for better or worse the market solution. So that at the end of market simulation, we can have a better assessment of what values we should be using for parallel operations.
Okay, okay, sounds good. And I also do want to, maybe just last question is that, so when you're doing analysis, other than looking the output, you're also looking the input as well, right? For the market input, including the data set.
Yes, obviously we have to ensure that the setup of the inputs are right, and the outcome is going to be largely influenced by the inputs, right? What level of load forecast we're going to be using to clear rough? Well, it depends whether you use a forecast of $50,000 or 40,000 or 30,000 is going to make a difference how you clear and how much you procure for RCU, RCD. So everything is predicated on the setup of the inputs. And it's not just one input, right? We're talking about all the system requirements, load forecast, AES, imbalance reserves, and transmission constraints, limitations, outages, bids for renewable resources. So all the bids that should be in place in production that now we don't have, because unless every single participant bids truly to what they are going to be doing in production, we are not going to be able to assume what those bids should be, right?
Understand that, and I understand. That is why I keep asking the input as when you're doing this study, there should have some correlation between your team and the market sims team for the data preparation, or at least the initial set of the input data will go in, and of course then on top of it, it's all the market participants, how they participate to the market. I think I asked my question. I just also, maybe I hope that I will get some clarity in the market sim co-op. Thank you.
Thank you for raising those questions, Chunju.
You're welcome.
Thank you. Next in the queue, we have Callie Wells.
PTF. First of all, thank you guys for refreshing everyone's memory on where these parameters stand and formally kicking off this process. I have a question, and maybe it's a little bit more of an ask in terms of what you guys plan on evaluating for the envelope constraints. Obviously, you'll be looking at that 85% parameter, and I'm assuming figuring out if it's a reasonable starting point for the use of the imbalance reserves. But I know some concerns have been raised in other forums kind of over the last year as it relates to this envelope constraint and potential implications it has on storage resources and how they're being dispatched by the market, especially when they become binding. So I was wondering if you guys have any plans on also digging into how those envelope constraints are impacting the storage resources scheduling throughout the day.
Well, that will be part of the analysis that we have to perform, okay, Kelly. I cannot prejudge what the outcome should be, but that is within the scope precisely to assess the interplay of these parameters into the market solution.
Okay, yeah, I wasn't sure if your analysis was focused just on the 85% parameter in that constraint, or seeing that these are brand new constraints being introduced in the market, if you're going to do kind of a more holistic evaluation of how this constraint is performing with regards to scheduling storage resources, as well as that 85% parameter. So if the answer is yes, great, looking forward to that. If not, then I guess it's an ask to maybe include it in the scope.
No, yeah, I understand now better the question. Yeah, thank you. Yeah, I think part of the analysis has to do with how the functionality is performing, right? Whether it's creating the intended outcomes or whether there are any unintended solutions. Yeah, that is going to be inherently part of the scope of the analysis.
Okay, wonderful. Thank you.
You're welcome.
All right. I know we're getting close to time, so maybe we can take one more question and then follow up with any others offline and then move to next steps.
Last hand is Alva Svoboda. Go ahead, Alva.
Hello, Guillermo, can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you, Alva.
Good. This is Alva Svoboda from PG&E. This is actually a follow-up. So I mean, my hypothesis is that there are two of these parameters that are actually really worth testing of the set that you've got there, because the set of contingencies is going to be provisional in any case. So I think the two that are actually of importance here are the deployment factors and the envelope constraint factors, because both of these potentially can create scarcity conditions in the imbalance reserves and in other products. And I'm in agreement with Callie that the consequence of the 85% level, well, actually, I'm not sure what her hypothesis is. My hypothesis is that it's going to either create very suboptimal schedules for a lot of batteries or create artificial scarcity conditions. And some of this goes to what Michelle was talking about as well, because if the amount of imbalance reserve that's being procured is excessive in the off-peak periods, then there's a possibility of scarcity being created in hours where there shouldn't be scarcity. So I just wanted to suggest that those would be directions that you'd want to look at in doing your studies. And I appreciate the care with which you describe what you're going to do, and I hope you'll look at those features of these parameters.
Yeah, good point, Sarah. And I think you're raising a very good area of analysis that may be a companion to the spirit of the effort. As I was indicating to Kelly, it's basically impossible to separate looking into how the functionality is performing versus the implications of the parameters. Yes, we are committing to look at this holistically.
Yeah, I think that this scarcity is a particularly important issue at any rate. Thank you.
Thank you.
All right. Can we move to the next step slide? All right, so we will be accepting comments on today's working group session. You can submit those comments through the comment template, which will be available out on the DAME Initiative webpage, which is linked here on this slide. We will keep comments open until September 16th. And then here listed below is the tentative work group schedule for the monthly working groups kicking off in October, running through March. So I do want to note that these are tentative dates. All of the working group dates will be confirmed through a notice in the daily briefing. This here just gives an idea of what we're looking at. We do also plan to allocate about 2 hours per working group. So I'd love your feedback on the length of the working group sessions as well. And following each of the working group sessions, we will have comment periods open and review and respond to feedback from customers. So with that, I'll turn things over to Christina.
Thanks, Isabella. I just have a couple announcements before we wrap up for the day. Here's some meetings, comment deadlines, and trainings to note for this week. Here's some market simulation meetings and information along with BPM updates. And lastly, for insights into the ISO grid and market operations, please be on the lookout for our Energy Matters blog, or you can always subscribe. Here you can see our latest blog posts regarding the new EDAM training sessions that will provide valuable insights for market participants. So with that, we'd like to thank you so much for joining today's call. As a reminder, this meeting was recorded for informational and convenience purposes only, and all meeting materials are available online. The video recording file will be available soon. Thank you, and we hope you have a wonderful rest of your day.